Sheriff Tucker was getting ready for bed on Sunday night, August 28th, when the phone rang. The caller was Brian Curry, his jailer. "Sheriff," Curry shouted, "Russell has escaped." "This tops anything I've seen in all my years on the force," Chief John Manos of Tarpon Springs, Florida, said as he entered the doorway, his eyes filled with the horror in that bedroom. Detective Robert Fulk followed him, entering the room with twin beds, where an elderly couple lay brutally tortured to death. The arms and legs of each were cruelly fastened to the bedposts, the blood still running out several cuts and gashes on throats, chests, and stomachs. An eerie silence in the room, but the soft moans of the barely alive woman shocked everyone there. "She's alive," Manos said, a hint of surprise cutting through the grimness. "Just barely," Fulk replied. A medical professional, summoned by the urgency of the situation, rushed to attend to the woman. She was swiftly taken to a hospital, leaving Chief Manos turning to Fulk with a demand for answers. "How about filling me in?" Manos pressed. Fulk, opening his notebook, said, "Shortly after 2 o'clock, a next-door neighbor of the Brownes, the victims, called our office to report trouble. Mr. and Mrs. Miles Crum, attacked and bleeding, were found inside their car. Both were severely cut with a knife. They claimed to have been calling on the Brownes when they encountered a tall, wild-eyed man leaving the house. The man slashed at them and fled in a dark-colored Ford sedan. That's all they know." "Did they recognize the man?" Manos inquired. "Never saw him before," said Fulk. "They said he was about 5 feet 11, 170 pounds, quite good-looking. He was wearing a tan jacket, khaki slacks, a t-shirt, and sports shoes." Fulk closed his book. Fulk explained that Mr. and Mrs. Norman Browne, in their early 70s, had come to Crystal Beach, Florida, several years before from New York. Browne had worked for more than 40 years for the New York Edison Company. Both were extremely well-liked in the small, waterside community. Meanwhile, a search of the neatly furnished bungalow failed to uncover any traces of money, thereby robbery theory most likely the motive for the murder. "It doesn't make sense," Sheriff Todd Tucker said, when he learned the facts shortly after his arrival. "Browne was a retired man. How would he have any substantial amount on him? There's a rumor that the Brownes didn't believe in banks, that they kept their savings hidden in the house," said Fulk. Tucker grimaced. "That kind of talk is lethal. We'll never know how many people have been killed by it." When police were searching the garage, they found a trail of blood, and etched on the wall was the letter P. It was followed by a series of numbers. "It's the license number of the killer's car," Tucker exclaimed. "Either Browne or his wife must have scratched it there while the killer wasn't looking." Tucker wrote the numbers on a slip of paper and gave it to Deputy James. "Get to the nearest phone and have headquarters check this license number," he ordered. "The P probably indicates that the guy lives in Pinellas County." It was agreed by the investigators that the killer had forced one of the Brownes, or perhaps both of them, to go out to the garage with him in search of their hidden money. Finding none, their enraged assailant then forced them to return to the house, where he tied them to their beds before torturing them. Constable Walter Carey made a significant discovery, a weather-beaten felt hat lying a few feet behind the garage. Inside its sweatband, he found several strips of paper torn from the comic section of the Tampa Tribune, dated Sunday, July 31st, 1949, just a week before. "Walter, hold on," interrupted Tucker. "I've got a lead here. There's a name and address stamped on the sweatband. It reads John Rogers, Haberdasher, Grand Central, Tampa." Deputy James returned at that moment. "There's a report from a man named Alfred Lusk. He claims his 46 Ford sedan was stolen early this morning," he stated. "A hot car," Tucker sighed. "I want every road within a 100-mile radius of Crystal Beach sealed tight. We need to catch this guy." Tucker then dispatched Fulk to the hospital. "Stay by Mrs. Browne's bed," he instructed. "If she regains consciousness, maybe she'll provide information about the killer that can be helpful." After an exhaustive search of the murder bungalow yielded no further valuable clues, Tucker and Manos drove to Tucker's office in Clearwater. Once there, the two men initiated the most extensive manhunt in the history of Florida. Every main and secondary road from Clearwater to Gainesville in the north, Orlando in the east, and Sarasota in the south was sealed tight. All leaves for personnel in various city, county, and state law enforcement divisions were cancelled, and all police staff were placed on 24-hour duty. Throughout the warm and humid night of August 7th, 1949, the relentless search for the torture slayer continued. Cars were stopped at gunpoint, and occupants were subjected to thorough questioning. Individuals buying plane, bus, or railway tickets were similarly scrutinized. It wasn't until nearly 8 o'clock the next morning that the weary investigators received their first lead. Alfred Lusk reported finding his stolen car parked a block from his home on De Leon Street in Tampa. Accompanied by Manos, Tucker drove to De Leon Street, where he found Lusk waiting for him. A thorough check of the car revealed several grocery bags stocked with flour, sugar, and a large quantity of canned goods. He probably intended to hide out somewhere until things cooled off, Tucker theorized. While the car was being processed at the police garage, Tucker drove to the haberdasher on Grand Central. Showing the hat to the dealer, he identified it as one he had sold a couple of weeks before. I don't recall the man's name, but his initials were JCR, replied the dealer. How come you remember that? Tucker asked. When he bought the hat, he decided to let me put his initials on the sweatband, explained Rogers. But just as I was about to stamp them on, he changed his mind. As for remembering those particular initials, they happen to be the same as mine, replied the dealer. Further questioning revealed that the dealer's description of the fugitive closely matched the one given by Mr. and Mrs. Crumb. Returning to the police garage, Tucker learned that a careful check of the stolen car hadn't uncovered any worthwhile prints, and there were no significant clues found inside. Driving back to Clearwater, Tucker found a tall, pleasant-faced youth waiting for him in his office. The youth, named Barlow, said he worked at a nearby Palm Harbor filling station. Tucker cautiously inquired, "You have something on the Browne case?" "I think so," Barlow said. "Around noon yesterday, a man pulled up alongside my pumps for gas. He was fairly tall, with dark hair, wearing tan trousers and a t-shirt. He looked about 32 or 33 years old. What makes you think he's the guy we're looking for?" "Well, he was very jumpy, for one thing," Barlow said. "For another, he was driving a 1946 Ford sedan, the same kind that was reported stolen. Ever seen him before?" "Yeah, a couple of times, mostly on weekends. I understand he does a lot of scallop fishing around Palm Harbor." After the young man was excused, Tucker, Manos, and other officers gathered to correlate the information they had gathered. "He may live in or near Palm Harbor," opined Tucker. "The fact that Barlow says the guy's face is familiar could mean he lives nearby." "I buy that," Manos nodded. "We know now what he looks like, and we also know his initials. The rest should be fairly easy." "Don't be too sure," Tucker cautioned. "We're not positive that the hat belongs to the killer. Just because it was found near the Browne home doesn't necessarily mean it was his." The officers continued discussing various aspects of the case when a man named W.L. Lambert was shown at the sheriff's office. Lambert explained that approximately 3 weeks before, on July 16th, a man had flagged him down a few miles outside of Azona. "When I stopped, he shoved a sawn-off shotgun in my face and ordered me to get out of the car," Lambert said. "He took me into the woods and tied me to a tree. Then he took my money. After he left, I managed to wriggle free. My car was found the next day in Tampa." Tucker recalled the case well. "And you figure he's the same man who killed Norman Browne?" he inquired. "I'd say so, yes. The descriptions of the two men match perfectly." After Lambert left, Tucker remarked, "The further we go into this case, the more he shapes up as a local man. First, he murders a man in Crystal Beach. Then we learn he buys gas at Palm Harbor, and now we place him near Azona, where he hijacks a car. All three places are within a stone's throw of each other." At Tucker's suggestion, the officers drove to Palm Harbor, where they began the tedious task of asking questions. Most of the residents of the little community were retired people who had settled in Florida for fishing and sunshine. None of them could recall seeing a young man fitting the fugitive's description until they spoke to Harvey Lake, who ran a rooming house on the outskirts of the town, and they got a real lead. Lake, a thick-set man in his 40s, nodded when Tucker described the suspected killer. "It could be him, all right," he mused. "You know such a guy?" Manos demanded. "Yeah, his name is Jimmy Sullivan. He's a tall, good-looking guy in his early 30s. Does a lot of scallop fishing." "Does he live around here?" "No, he just stays with me over the weekends. He lives with an aunt on East Louisiana Avenue in Tampa." "When did you see him last?" "About 2 hours ago. He went scallop fishing in St. Joseph's Bay with my son Albert and my daughter Alice." Tucker digested the information. The initials in the name Sullivan certainly did not coincide with the hat dealer's unless... "Are you sure his name is Sullivan?" asked the sheriff. "I'm not sure of anything about the guy," Lake replied. "I see him only at weekends. Do you know if he owns a dark blue hat?" "He was wearing one when he left here yesterday, but he didn't have it this morning. Nor did a thorough search of the suspect's room uncover the hat. But the officers did find an envelope in the dresser, addressed to a John Calvin Russell in Tampa. It's the same initials he gave the hat dealer," Manos said. "He's our man, all right." "Looks like it," Tucker agreed. "Let's go get him." In an hour, a small army of heavily armed men lined the sunlit shores of St. Joseph's Bay. They spotted Russell and Lake's children without any difficulty. But before they could swing into action, the fugitive saw them and began swimming swiftly towards Honeymoon Key, a small island about 2 miles offshore. 2 deputies swam out to get him, but he easily outdistanced them. Tucker, Fulk, and Manos then hired a motorboat and set out after their quarry. The superbly conditioned suspect was still swimming vigorously when they overtook him. "Okay, Russell, it's the end of the line," boomed Tucker. Russell turned, saw the guns pointed at him, and then grinned widely. He was quickly hoisted aboard and handcuffed. "You guys are making a colossal mistake," he said, with an unsettling amiability. If we are, rest assured, we'll extend our sincerest apologies, Tucker retorted, his tone unwavering. And trust me when I say, his story is far from ending now. Taken to headquarters in Clearwater, John Calvin Russell broke down and admitted to killing Norman Browne for a cache of money that never existed. Later, he was taken to Mrs. Browne, who positively identified him as the man who had tortured her and her husband. Then, returned to the Pinellas County Jail, Russell further confessed to the attack on Lambert several weeks before. A check into the killer's past revealed that he was born and raised a few miles north of Ozona and that he was known as a mean character. In 1939, he served a prison sentence for car theft. It was also learned that he was arrested in West Memphis, Arkansas in 1942 for stealing a car in Chicago. He was returned to Illinois, where he served out his term. Upon its completion, he returned to Florida and resumed his life of crime. Sheriff Tucker was getting ready for bed on Sunday night, August 28th, when the phone rang. The caller was Brian Curry, his jailer. "Sheriff," Curry exclaimed, "Russell has escaped." When Tucker reached the jail, he found Curry suffering from a 6-inch gash on his forehead. Curry explained that Russell had complained of a headache and had asked for medication. When Curry brought it to him, Russell struck him on the head with a blackjack. When he came to, the killer was gone. In a matter of minutes, the whole countryside was alerted to the escape. Local radio stations were asked to notify listeners to keep their doors and windows securely locked. Meanwhile, a search of the jail yard uncovered a series of bloodstains leading from the high-wire fence to the intersection of Myrtle Avenue and Franklin Street. "He probably cut himself when he scaled the fence," said Spooner. "But why do the stains end here?" The answer came a few minutes later, when it was learned that a truck belonging to the Central Truck Line Co., usually parked at that spot, was missing. This was confirmed when a check uncovered information that a truck matching the description had been seen roaring down Myrtle Avenue. Tucker and his men followed in pursuit. Around 20 minutes later, they came across the abandoned truck, pointed towards Palm Harbor. In examining the truck, they found a short piece of galvanized pipe, one end of which was blood-stained. "How he got hold of it beats me," said Tucker. "He hasn't had a visitor since we picked him up." Swarms of police immediately converged on the area. Several small teams were organized, each given a specific territory to cover. However, morning came with no word of the fugitive. By this time, more than 300 men were patrolling the area within a 5-mile radius of the abandoned truck. At Tucker's request, 2 helicopters were pressed into the search that morning. Despite an exhaustive search that turned the entire area inside out, there was no sign of the elusive fugitive, leaving the search party in mounting frustration. "He has no money, so it's my guess he'll rob a store to get food," Tucker said. The sheriff was right, because early on Wednesday morning, Raleigh Allen, owner of a grocery store in Citrus Park, reported that his store had been broken into sometime during the night. Tucker and his men drove to the store, where a close examination of the premises showed bloodstains on the windowsill. A cordon of police was quickly thrown about the area, but to no avail. Russell had completely disappeared. "That guy knows this territory like the back of his hand," Tucker grumbled. "We've got to get him before he kills someone else." At the sheriff's suggestion, a large number of local citizens were organized into groups that would patrol the streets during the night. Among them were several women, armed with rifles and shotguns. The big break came early on Thursday afternoon when Percy Wheeler, owner of a roadside beverage stand, phoned Sheriff Tucker to report that he had seen a man answering the killer's description walking along the highway a few miles east of Clearwater. After Tucker ordered every available man into action, the area around the little beverage stand was soon swarming with police cars of every shape and size. The sheriff was busily assigning his men when a man walked up to him and said that he had just seen a man skulking through some orange trees a few hundred yards north of the highway. With Chief Manos and Detective Fulk, the sheriff hurried to the grove. They were walking slowly through the orange trees when Fulk detected a stealthy movement behind a small storage tank. "There he is!" Fulk shouted. The officers spread out, their guns ready. No one moved as they eyed the oval-shaped tank warily. "Okay, Russell, come on out," Tucker barked. "I count 3. If you don't come out by then with your hands up, we're coming after you." As Tucker reached 2, Russell, his face and clothes smeared with dirt, emerged cautiously from his hiding place. His hands rose in surrender, a mocking grin etched on his features as he walked slowly towards the officers. As he came nearer, a long-bladed knife suddenly leapt from nowhere into his hand. "Drop it, or we'll fire!" Tucker shouted. Instead of complying, Russell dipped into a crouch, the knife poised threateningly in his hand. He was about to spring when several shots rang out. Russell, his eyes flashing a look of shocked surprise, crumpled slowly to the ground without a word. As his life drained away, a look of shocked surprise flickered in Russell's eyes before his head slowly slumped to one side, the weight of his demise sinking in. He was dead. The most exciting manhunt in the history of Pinellas County at the time had come to an end.